We've all been there, right?
Hmm.
You're at dinner and suddenly you just hit that wall.
Uh-huh.
You know that I'm stuffed feeling.
Yeah.
But have you ever stopped to think how your brain actually knows when to stop eating?
Right.
Like, is there an off switch?
Yeah.
Well, a new study in the journal Cell might have found it. And in this deep dive, we're going to break it all down. And I think it just might change how you look at your next meal.
Well, this study is so fascinating because it actually pinpoints a specific group of neurons in the brainstem that seem to be responsible for regulating how much we eat.
The brainstem, that's a pretty old part of the brain, isn't it? I mean, we share that with tons of creatures.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that makes this discovery so important.
Okay.
It suggests that the way our appetite is controlled is really deep rooted in our evolution.
Interesting.
These neurons, unlike the ones that just sense fullness in your stomach or something,
Right.
they're getting information from all over. They integrate signals from your mouth, your gut, your hormones, even what you see and smell.
So it's like a central command for your appetite.
Yeah.
This tiny cluster of neurons is getting all this intel and then deciding when we've had enough.
That's a great way to think about it.
Wow.
And what's even cooler is that researchers were actually able to change these neurons in mice using optogenetics.
Oh, up to genetics.
Yeah.
I've heard of that.
They could literally turn these neurons on or off using light.
Now, for those of us who aren't neuroscientists, can you break down optogenetics a little bit?
Sure. Basically, it's a way to use light to activate or deactivate specific neurons
Uh-huh.
that have been modified to be sensitive to light.
I see.
And this lets the researchers really precisely study what these neurons do.
Cool.
In this case, they were able to really just look at the effects of these stop-eating neurons.
So what happened when they flipped the switch?
Well, when they activated these neurons, the mice started eating less at each meal.
Interesting.
And the thing is, it's not like they just suddenly stopped eating altogether.
Right.
They would kind of gradually slow down, which makes you think it's more complicated than just a I'm full signal.
Yeah. So it's less like an on-off switch
Yeah.
and more like a dimmer switch,
Yep.
slowly dialing down the appetite.
Uh-huh.
Now, this study was done on mice, but does any of this apply to humans?
Right.
I mean, we don't have light switches in our brains.
Right. That's a great question, and it's what everybody's asking.
Yeah.
But the encouraging thing is that this area of the brain, the brainstem, is very similar across different species.
Okay.
So it's very likely that humans have these same neurons.
So theoretically, if we could somehow control these neurons in humans, could we have like a safe and effective way to manage things like overeating or obesity?
It's a really interesting possibility. But obviously, we need more research to understand exactly how these neurons work in humans
Of course.
and if they can actually be used to help people.
Right. Now, speaking of therapies, there's a lot of talk these days about these new weight loss drugs,
Yeah.
like Ozempic and Wegovy.
Mm.
Does this research tell us anything about how those might work?
You know, that's a great question because the researchers also looked at how different hormones affected these stop-eating neurons.
Right.
And what they found was actually pretty amazing.
Interesting. Tell me more.
They found that this group of drugs called GLP-1 agonists, and that includes drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy,
Uh-huh.
actually activate these neurons.
Oh, wow. So those drugs, they might actually be working by mimicking our natural signals that tell us to stop eating.
Yeah, that's one possible explanation.
That's so much cooler than just suppressing your appetite.
Right. It really highlights how, if we can understand these basic brain mechanisms,
Yeah.
that it can lead to some really new and cool treatments.
Now, before we move on, maybe you could just quickly explain what GLP-1 agonists are.
Sure. GLP-1 agonists, they're drugs that mimic a natural hormone called GLP-1,
Right.
and it helps regulate blood sugar levels.
Okay.
And it seems from this study, it also activates those stop-eating neurons.
Wow. So these drugs are essentially kind of hijacking the brain's natural system for controlling appetite.
Yeah, you could say that.
And that could be a total game changer for people who are struggling with obesity.
It could be. But of course, there are always potential side effects and things to think about.
Of course.
But this research does give us some really promising new directions for developing better treatments.
It's amazing to think that we're just starting to understand how our brains control something as basic as eating. And I can't wait to see what other discoveries are made.
Me too. That's what makes science so fun.
Mhm.
There's always more to learn, and every new discovery opens up a whole new world of possibilities.
And speaking of new discoveries, there's one more really interesting part of this study that I want to dig into.
Okay.
We've been talking about how these neurons take in signals from all over the body.
Uh-huh.
But could they also be affected by things that aren't directly related to food, like stress, emotions, even our environment? We'll get into that right after this. So we've been talking about how these neurons integrate all these signals from the body.
Right.
But could they also be influenced by things beyond just our physical needs?
Oh, for sure.
I mean, we all know that our emotions play a huge role in our eating habits.
Absolutely. Think about comfort food. We crave certain things when we're stressed, even if we're not actually hungry.
Right, exactly. And those cravings aren't just about those physical signals of fullness that we were talking about earlier.
Oh,
So could it be that these stop eating neurons are factoring in things like our mood or even our environment?
it's definitely possible, and it's actually one of the areas that researchers are starting to look into.
Right.
This particular study didn't look at those things directly,
Right.
but it makes you wonder, if these neurons take in so much information, then it makes sense that they'd be influenced by all sorts of things, not just how full we are.
It's like our brains are constantly weighing all these different inputs, our physical needs, our emotions, what's going on around us, and trying to make sense of it all.
Exactly.
And sometimes those signals get crossed and we end up overeating even when our bodies are telling us to stop.
It's like this constant back and forth between the brain and the body.
Yeah.
And the messages don't always get through clearly.
So if these neurons are so sensitive to our emotions and our environment, could we actually train ourselves to be more aware of those influences?
Interesting question. It suggests maybe we could learn to be more in tune with those emotional triggers
Yeah.
and find different ways to cope that don't involve turning to food.
Right. Like say you always crave chips after a long day.
Uh-huh.
Instead of giving in, maybe you go for a walk or call a friend or just do something else to de-stress.
Exactly. Finding healthier ways to manage our emotions.
And then there's the social aspect. Think about how much our environment affects how much we eat.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Like portion distortion.
Hmm.
If everyone around you is eating a ton, you're more likely to do the same.
For sure. Social cues can really impact how much we eat. It's almost like we're wired to follow the crowd, even when it comes to food.
So if these stop eating neurons are picking up on those cues, could we train ourselves to be less susceptible to that kind of influence?
That's a great point. Maybe we could learn to be more attuned to our own internal signals of fullness
Uh-huh.
and not let ourselves be swayed by what everyone else is doing.
Wow, this is all so fascinating. It really shows how complicated our relationship with food is.
It is. It's not just about what we put in our mouths. It's about biology and psychology and our social world.
It's crazy to think how much is going on in our brains that we don't even realize.
It is, and that's what makes neuroscience so exciting. Every time we learn something new, it opens up a whole new set of questions.
Well said. And that brings us to the practical implications of this research. We've talked about new therapies and being more mindful, but what are some tangible things people can do right now to get back in control of their eating? We'll dive into that right after this.
Yeah.
So we've been talking about how much our environment can influence our eating habits.
Yeah.
What are some things people can do to kind of tune into those stop eating neurons and make smarter choices about how much they eat?
Well, one of the best things you can do is to slow down and really pay attention to your body.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're so busy these days, we often rush through meals.
Yeah, for sure.
We barely even taste our food, let alone think about how full we are.
It's so true. We've all been there, scarfing down lunch at our desks or dinner in front of the TV.
Right. But if we can make an effort to eat more mindfully, really savor each bite, and pay attention to how we feel,
Yeah.
we're much more likely to notice when we're getting full before we overdo it.
So it's about being more present in the moment,
Mm-hmm.
engaging all of our senses and listening to what our body's telling us.
Exactly. And another thing that can help is to minimize distractions while you're eating. Turn off the TV, put your phone away. Just create a calm and a relaxing environment where you can just focus on the food.
It's like creating a peaceful space just for nourishing yourself.
I like that. And it actually leads into another important point, which is to be aware of the emotional triggers that can make you overeat.
Uh-huh.
So, if you tend to reach for comfort food when you're stressed or down, try to come up with other ways to cope with those feelings.
We touched on that earlier, but maybe you could give us some concrete examples.
Oh, absolutely. So instead of reaching for that bag of chips or ice cream when you're feeling overwhelmed, you could go for a walk, call a friend, take a relaxing bath, maybe listen to music,
Yeah.
anything that helps you to de-stress in a healthy way.
It's about finding those fulfilling alternatives, right? So we're not always turning to food to fill that void.
Right, and just remember, building new habits takes time and practice. Don't get discouraged if you slip up sometimes.
Yeah, for sure.
Just keep working on it, and eventually you'll start to be more in tune with your body, and making those healthy choices will become second nature.
This has been an incredible deep dive. I mean,
Yeah.
we've gone from the depths of the brainstem all the way to the complexities of our emotions and our social lives,
Right.
all to try to understand how our brains figure out when to tell us to stop eating.
Mm-hmm.
It really blows my mind to realize how much is going on behind the scenes of something that seems so simple.
It really is amazing. It shows just how powerful and complex the human brain is.
And this is really just the beginning. As scientists learn more about the brain, who knows what other discoveries are out there.
Right.
Maybe someday we'll be able to use these stop-eating neurons to create personalized diets,
That would be incredible.
like tailor-made for each person's biology and lifestyle.
Imagine being able to fine-tune your diet based on how your brain is wired.
Wow.
It could help prevent overeating and just keep you healthier overall.
That's a future I'm definitely excited for.
Yeah.
But for now, let's focus on what we can do today. Listen to your body, make mindful choices, and remember you have more control over your eating habits than you might think.
Absolutely. And don't stop being curious.
Uh-huh.
There's so much more to learn about science and the amazing things our brains can do.
That's it for this week's Deep Dive. Huge thanks to our expert guest for all of these amazing insights. And to all of our listeners, thank you for tuning in.
Yes, thanks everyone.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a comment if you have any suggestions for future deep dives.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
And until next time, keep those brains buzzing.